All right, let's look at the second part of the framework. Let me invite you to share my screen. Okay, so if you will look, the second part of Mariana Soto Manning's framework actually says transformation of teaching. The first was transformation of self. The second part is transformation of teaching. And she says, Grant and Sleeter said that in order for you to transform your teaching, there has to be two things that are in place. For more equitable education, we have to do the critical examination of all aspects of school. And we do this by looking at the following things. We ask, is my teaching fostering student-centered ways of learning? So am I teaching in ways that put students at the heart of everything that I do? And then the second thing that we have to look at is, how do I design multicultural curriculum based on what I know about children? And so to do this, we have to think about, what is it that I know about my children, the students in my class? What is it that I need to know? Where do I get this information? And then how do I use this information to build curriculum for and with students and the families and the communities in which our school is situated? So I often hear teachers ask questions in regards to, well, how do you get to know students? It takes time. And so you do that through critical kid watchings. Like you ask questions about them, from them, and you ask questions about them from those who are their family members, okay? That also means that sometimes you have to go outside of the schools to get to know who students are. What are their likes? What are their dislikes? What are the things that they're good at? What are the things that they could benefit from learning, okay? And you use that to then create your classroom curriculum, or even set up your classroom ethos, so that the students find a space where they are reflected, not only in the classroom itself, but in the curriculum in which you teach, okay? So when we transform our teaching, here are some things that we should consider. Does my teaching provide equitable opportunities for all learners? Am I teaching where everyone finds an entry point? Do I have enough differentiation where students from different ability groups, cognitive as well as physical, can find themselves in the curriculum? Is my teaching culturally diverse? Or am I only bringing to the curriculum those pieces of resource that look like me, or things that I like? Am I only selecting books that I want to read? Or am I allowing the things that I know about my children to influence what I bring into the classroom, okay? Whose voice is missing from my teaching? Am I only presenting content from one point of view? Are there other ways of knowing this information? Whose story am I telling? Whose story am I not telling? What points of view need to be added into the curriculum, okay? So when we start thinking it in this regard, then we are doing a better job of making sure that we are building curriculum for and with students, and that students are centered at the core of our curriculum, okay? Teachers often ask, well, how do you do this when you have standards or pacing guides or exams or tests that, like benchmarks or the end of course tests or even the end of year tests? And I know that this is going to sound simplified, but my response is usually, I think it's more important to teach the kids than it is to teach the test. Yes, you need to know what kind of things you need to teach toward, but if you only teach the test and you miss the kids, you're still not going to get the results that you desire anyway. So yes, have curriculum standards in mind, use the pacing guide, but at the center of everything you do, make it relevant for kids. How do you foster student-centered teaching? Mariana Soto Manning says that experiences of students, their families, and their community are brought into the curriculum, making learning active, interactive, relevant, and engaging. So if you can find something in your students' lives that you can build curriculum around, yes, that is certainly going to make it interactive and engaging. When we think about multicultural curriculum, here are things that we should ask. Who told the story? Whose point of view is this told from, or whose perspective? Are there additional explanations to this? So if you read chapter 2, you realize that there were folks who knew that the world was round before Columbus even set sail for India. But why is it that we're only told the story of Columbus? Why is that important? Whose voice is silenced? Is that the full, complete story? So you always need to think about this when you're creating curriculum. Am I only presenting this information from one point of view? What other points of view might be considered so that I give children a more comprehensive understanding of this, okay? And then there's this issue of transformation of society. And the ultimate goal of this is to contribute to the positive transformation of society and the negotiation and maintenance of social justice and equity. So when we're doing this kind of work with students, our goal is that we're educating children at this point so that one day when they grow up and they're the people in positions to make decisions, or people who are in positions of power, that their thinking will be more just and equitable for all, not just self, more just and equitable for all. So when we think about, like, are we teaching in ways to help our students transform society, or are we teaching in ways that we ourselves are transforming society? Here's a question I want you to think about. Am I teaching in a way that encourages my students to become new human beings who are committed to working against the status quo and social injustices in societal places? And if you can answer yes to that, then you're doing the kind of work that will make this world a better place, not only for some, but for all. Okay? All right, so let's look at, why is this important? Why should we teach to transform society? Young has given us, in the original research, there were originally 5 faces of oppression. There is now a 6th face. And it says, traditionally, oppression means the exercise of tyranny by a ruling group, but it creates injustices and circumstances for others. So in many cases, a well-intentioned liberal society can place system-wide constraints on groups and limit their freedom. And we may think, well, I don't do that. But are we engaged in behavior where we can oppress others unintentionally? Of course we can. And we'll look at some of those throughout our time. So oppression can be the result of a few people's choices or policies that cause embedded, unquestioned norms or habits of symbols. Oppression is when people who reduce the potentials of other people to be fully human. This could mean treating them in dehumanizing manners. It could also mean denying people language, education, and opportunities that make them become fully human in both body and mind. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Think about a few years ago when students from other countries came and English wasn't their native language, and there was this belief that they could not speak their native tongue in schools. Because in schools, what was considered the norm? English. So there were lots of times that we thought we were doing things that were in the good of all, but what we were really doing was preventing some folks from fully being who they were in a society that didn't accept their language as the norm. And so my thing is, how do we get to the place of having a norm? That goes back to video 1, where we talk about socialization. We're socializing to believing that some ways of living in the world are normal and others are not. And because of that, Jung says there are these ways that we oppress others: exploitation, marginalization, violence, powerlessness, culture of silence, and culture of imperialism. And I'll briefly explain what each of these represent. When Jung speaks of exploitation, it says exploitation uses capitalism to oppress. Capitalism creates haves and have-nots. And it sometimes says this is the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. So one form of exploitation is capitalism. One form of oppression is exploitation, pardon me. So there are systems where this is in place. Sometimes folks are exploited on jobs. You do this job and I'll pay you this minimum amount of wages because you need this, and I'm at the position where I can offer it, but I'm going to offer it at a lesser amount because I want to keep you in a position where you're going to always need me. That's one form of oppression. Another is marginalization. And Jung, when he speaks of this, says it is the act of relegating or confining a group of people to a lower social standing or the outer limit or edge of society overall. It is the process of exclusion. Often people are marginalized based on their race. And so let's take, for instance, what's currently going on in our society. We have folks who are being marginalized right now because of their race. Okay? There's children who are being detained because their parents are not naturalized citizens of the US. And so that's based simply on race. Some people may argue differently, but I see this as one of those issues where marginalization based on race is a very viable thing that we experience. Here's another example that Jung speaks of oppression, where it's violence. Violence is the most obvious and physical form of oppression. And it is when members of some groups live with the knowledge that they must fear random, unprovoked attacks on their person or their property. The example that comes to mind whenever I think about violence is I think about folks who may consider themselves of the LGBTQA plus society, how oftentimes those folks are, they have violence or perpetrated against them because they are not seen as a part of the normal heterosexual society. This is a form of oppression where folks are in fear for themselves, their lives, their property, okay? Another example of oppression that is often exhibited by some is this of power. And power is linked to Marx's theory of socialism, that some people have power while others have not, none at all. So the powerless, they are often dominated by those who have power or the ruling class, and they have to take orders, and they rarely have rights that are given to them. So those who are in power make decisions about what will happen or will not happen, and those who do not have power often have to live within those rules and constraints, okay? Then there is this issue of the culture of silence. It's a form of oppression where oppressed people become so powerless that they don't even talk about their oppression anymore. When they reach this stage, it is forbidden to even mention that there are injustices that are being put on them, because they feel powerless. They have no, where do they turn? They feel that they're in a system that doesn't even see them, okay? They are dehumanized, and that they feel that there are negative perceptions and they see them as fact, okay? And then the last face of oppression that Jung speaks about is the culture of imperialism. And it says, this involves taking the culture of the ruling class and establishing it as norms. So those are who are in power, who can make decisions about what is normal or what is the rule of the land. They invoke those on others. The group that have power in society control the people in that society, and they tell us what to interpret and how to communicate. The belief of the society are most widely disseminated and expressed. The experiences, values, groups, and the achievement of those in this group. So think about it. Who controls how we're socialized? Those who are in power, those who have access. So when we think about, like, say, what's shown on television, those who are in power have the decision as to what others see. Those who have less power have less access, have less rights. Okay? I want you to take a moment, and I want you to pause the video, and I want you to reflect on your experience so far. So take a few minutes, and in your place where you keep notes or you write about this, I want you to reflect on this, because I do want us to talk about this to some degree. I want you to think about, what have you thought about in regards to how you've been socialized, your transformation of self, transformation of teaching, transformation of society, how you've been socialized. And then I want you to think about, have you experienced any forms of oppression? And write about that. Like, have you been oppressed in any way? And who was the oppressor? And how did that feel? And then I also want you to reflect on and be honest with yourself. Have you been an oppressor? And write that. And tell us why. Which form of oppression, based on what Jung has said, were you exhibiting? Okay? So take a few minutes and jot that down. Okay, I'm going to keep going, but I wanted you to pause the video now. Here, welcome back. So, in order for us to transform society, we have to go through this cycle of liberation. So just like we've been socialized into believing certain things through a cycle that's never ending, there is a cycle of liberation where it is never ending, but we come to it knowing that there has to be a change. And usually that change happens on a personal level when there's a critical incident that creates cognitive dissonance for us, and it wakes us up. Something happens, it wakes us up, okay? And so from that, we tap into our, like, why is this resonating with me? Why is this happening? And then what usually happens is we seek education. We get ready for change. We get inspired. We become empowered to do things. And then we think introspectively, okay? And then we build community of like-minded folks who may have experienced something similar to that which we've experienced. And we go there and we gather in number, those who are like us, those people who are going to work in the same, on one accord in support of moving forward. We turn our anger into energy, and then we're motivated to take action. So the action could be some of the things that we've recently seen in the news. We could take a stand, or we could take a knee, or we could march, or we could advocate, or we could boycott to some degree. But whatever way of resistance or action we decide, then it moves us to do something. In order for liberation to happen, a group of us must do something to create change. That could be writing new policies. That could be transformation of a new organization. It could be taking on roles of leadership. And then in that regard, we create change, and then we inspire others to do the same thing, and the cycle continues, okay? So, cycle of liberation is certainly important. The last thing I want to show you in regards to this in Module 1 is a lot of times I find that this clip is so important for us to think about. When we look at issues of equality, it means that everybody gets the same thing. But if you look at the first image, not everybody needs the same thing. Even with the same exact amount of steps, there are still folks who can't see over the fence. There are folks who barely are able to see over the fence. There are folks who didn't even need a cart or a crate anyway to see over the fence. Then there's the second frame where the belief is, well, then we should provide equity. Everybody gets what he or she needs. So if you look at that, yeah, equity makes sure that everyone gets what he or she needs. And that is a positive change. But what usually happens is the reality of things is that there are some folks who get far more than what they need and they didn't need it anyway. There are folks that get just the right amount. And then there are folks that don't get enough at all. Okay? There are still structural inequities in place that prevent those who don't have to continue and maintain not having. But the last image is the image that I am now a believer of, that we have to have points of liberation, where why is there some structure in place to prevent everyone access in the first place? Tear down the wall. And so that's the thing that I think is important. When we think about transforming society, we have to transform society in such a way that it liberates those systems that are in place to prevent some folks from having, while at the same time allowing others to have far more than enough. Okay? So I love this clip, and I hope that this course becomes that catalyst that helps you to start thinking about what ways can we liberate our world so that it becomes more, a more just and equitable space for all. Okay? All right.